All right, I think we will kick it off now. Thank you again, everyone, for joining. We're just going to go through a couple of housekeeping rules before we introduce myself, Eva, and Oscar. And then we've got three brilliant speakers today, Sefton, Adam, and Tom, that are going to take us through the next couple of hours. So first of all, thank you for joining, and we appreciate that you're taking the time out of your day, especially with the event kind of changing last minute due to all of the coronavirus scenario that's going on at the moment. But thankfully we were able to put the event on virtually, and a big thank you to all of Tableau's marketing team, especially Caroline, who's on the call, for all of the awesome work she's done to transition it across from being an in-person event to a virtual one. So while we aren't able to have the in-person nice lunch and networking afterwards, we'd still like to try and make the event as close and have that in-person feel about it. So we have got a couple of polls just to kick us off to find out where everyone is dialing in from. So hopefully you'll have seen a little thing pop up on your screen. So if you're able just to enter where you're dialing in from, and then we can have a look at the results just to find out where everyone is coming from today. I'll just give that a few seconds. Okay, should we have a look at the results of that one? England, so most people dialing in from England today. A few people from Belgium, Italy, Switzerland, across Europe, and a few from the rest of the world. So hopefully not too many Americans, given that it will be right in the middle of the night for them, but plenty across Europe and lots across England. Just going to do one more quick poll. If you're able to launch the next one, Caroline, this one around what area of football do you work in currently? If you don't feel like your job role fits into any of these neatly, then just pick the one that you would like to work in. Okay, let's close that one up, see what the results for this one are. Lots of performance analysis on the call, which is wonderful. We've got Tom speaking, who is a performance analyst himself, so hopefully lots of good stuff coming from him a little later as well. Excellent, thank you very much. So in terms of housekeeping, there is a Q&A box. We're hosting this webinar on Zoom. So there's a Q&A box. If you've got questions either for us as the user group leaders or the speakers as they're going through their talks, if you'd like to pop a question in that Q&A box, then we'll either get around to answering it in person if we can, and if not, then we'll be taking a note of all of the questions and we can follow those up after the event. I guess the other thing that we lose from not having it in person is the ability to have a chat afterwards, talk through how you're using Tableau, where you need help using Tableau, and allow people to kind of network with each other just to understand the use cases and what people are really getting the most out of Tableau for in their jobs. So we will be running this on a quarterly basis. We will be running a survey after the event just to find out what you think worked well about this event, what you'd like to see from future events, because ultimately we would like this user group to be user run. It is for all the different football clubs, people working in football across Europe and across the world. So we would really value your input. This is a relatively new thing for us as well, and we'd like to involve you in the decision-making process of what you think will be most useful for the event going forward. So we'll send that out after the event. But if there are any questions, or if you want to talk to either the speakers or to ourselves after the event, then we will put up our emails at the end so that you can get in touch with us. I believe we're all on social media, on Twitter and LinkedIn as well. So plenty of opportunity if you want to discuss anything after the event. Then we'll try and keep it as close to it would have been in real person, in real life, as possible. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Oscar, who's going to talk us through a little bit of the founding of the football user group. We'll do a couple of introductions and then we'll go ahead with Tom as our first speaker. So over to Oscar.
Thank you very much, James. Appreciate that. So wanted to really cover off how the user group came about. Last year, I worked with a number of clubs, and pretty much every time I was speaking to different clubs, it was all being used in different ways. So I had clubs using it for ticketing. I had clubs using Tableau for sports science. I had clubs using it for performance analysis. I had clubs using it for player recruitment. The list goes on. There's so many variants of it. The one thing that it kept coming back to me was every time I was talking to a different club, I was mentioning the art of the possible and what could be done. However, it's kind of one voice of myself, as opposed to the idea of Tableau is that it's a community. It's a BI platform that allows people to talk about different ideas and to work off each other. So me and James actually sat down when he came into our office, and we were just talking about sport in general and data. Things like, we got example, we're talking about Formula One and how data driven that is. And then we came on to the football topic, and I mentioned how often I was speaking to clubs about different things and how great it'd be if we could try and get a way to sync everyone together. So sort of born off of that was the idea of the football user group. And it's kind of ran since then. So James has been massive in helping me get this up. Same with Caroline. And also what I'm delighted to say is he's also someone who runs the SportViz part on Tableau Public. And he's also able to get Eva Murray involved too. If you're not aware of Eva, I'll let her do her own introduction. But it's a really big name to have as our leaders. So James and Eva are going to be leading the football user group. And I'll be working on more sort of the architectural side of it, making sure that we've got good infrastructure around it and kind of keep working, innovating ideas. The other thing I also wanted to cover off was that how quickly sort of the user group picked up. So we had an initial list of speakers and two of them weren't actually able to make it, but we'd had people reaching out already saying that they were really interested in being part of the Tableau user group. So wanted to take this time to thank Sefton, who reached out to me, Tom, who reached out to me, and also Adam, who I reached out to around being able to put their time aside and share what they're doing with Tableau. And I'm really excited that this is going to be kind of our first step in what I think is going to be a great user group and a great place for people to share ideas. And on that, I'm going to pass back to James and to Eva to really introduce themselves slightly, and then we'll move on. Thanks.
Super. Thanks very much, Oscar. So, very brief introduction to myself. I am an analytics consultant at Biztory, who are a Tableau partner. I previously worked at EY as an accountant, so I trained as a as a chartered accountant, and then gradually found my way into working with data and analytics and using several different BI tools, but with a strong preference for Tableau. And hence I joined a Tableau partner, and now we spend our time working with clients, helping them either get started, so move out of the worlds of Excel and PowerPoint into using Tableau and using data in a smarter way, and also helping at the higher level when people have been using Tableau for a while, getting their servers set up, working out how to make their dashboards more efficient, working out certain calculations and how to automate some processes as well. So we've been doing that now for about 9 months, and we've really started to focus on working with sports clubs. So within football, also without a football, in cricket and Formula One, we've been working with various clubs, just helping them kind of define firstly their data strategy, how to make the most of the data, and also how to visualize information in a way that is useful for coaches, for players to use, and for teams to actually kind of gain that competitive advantage through using the huge amount of data that is now out there. So really excited to host this Tableau user group together with Eva and Oscar. And for those of you that aren't familiar with user groups, there are location-specific ones. So there's London, Manchester, Yorkshire one, and there's also industry-specific ones. So there is a health user group, and now we've got the football user group. And it's basically a safe space for people to get together to understand what other people are using Tableau and data for. And it's very much, I'm going to reinforce the point that it is driven by the community and driven by the people that want to either speak or want to have input into the direction that this is going to be going. So hand over to Eva, and finally, Eva will do her introduction, and then we'll get started with our first speaker, Tom.
Excellent. Thank you, James. And hello to everyone who's dialed in. It's really exciting to see those numbers pop up of how many people we have on the call. My name is Eva Murray. I'm head of BI and Tableau Zen Master at Exasol, based out of London. And through this job, I had the pleasure to work with a couple of clubs in the UK and who've started using our product together with Tableau to do real-time analytics during games, who do pre and post-match analysis, who use it for scouting and recruiting. And it's been a really fun journey for me because football is definitely not where I started my career, but it's been so fascinating seeing what people do with data and how they use data and analysis to in this industry to get more out of the teams, out of the athletes, but also to get closer to fans to improve that experience. And so I'm really looking forward to these sessions and the feedback we get from all of you afterwards. It would have been great to meet everyone in person. Hopefully we can do that next time round. And I hope I'll learn a bunch of things from Sefton. I've seen him present before, so I know this one's going to be really good, but also from Tom and from Adam. And please do connect with us on social media, on LinkedIn, by email if you have any questions or suggestions afterwards as well. And yeah, with that, I'm going to hand over to our first presenter.
Super. So, Tom, if you're able to share your screen, let us know if you experience any problems. Who is a product manager at Tableau? Adam, are you able to share your screen?
I am.
Superb. So it looks like you're in are you at home today, or are you in the Tableau offices?
I'm in the office. I'm squirreled away on the 11th floor. Nice and quiet.
Super.
There.
Awesome. Take it away.
Great. Can you see my slide?
Yes.
Fantastic. And also, Tom, that was fantastic. I thought that was really fascinating. So thanks for sharing that. So, hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Adam Cook. I work for Tableau. And I'm here to share the story of how I stumbled across arguably the next big thing in football. So I'll be using Tableau to retell that story. So for those of you that don't use the software currently, it's a chance to get a taste for how the software works and how you might get started with some simple analysis. So a bit about me initially. I work in pre-sales at Tableau, which is sort of a combination of technical consulting, a bit of product evangelism, which is somewhat what I'm doing today, and technical sales. And essentially, I get to spend most of my days just playing with data in Tableau in front of customers and picking up some interesting insights along the way as well. Now, I have to be honest, compared to Tom and the likes of Sefton here, I'm a complete imposter when it comes to the credentials to speak about football. I just about know the difference between association football, rugby football, Aussie rules, footy, and of course, American football, all of which I enjoy, by the way. And don't worry, I'm quite aware that we're here to talk about the round ball here today. But my domain is very much data and Tableau. That said, I have picked up a thing or two during my distinguished career as a player. So here I am posing proudly in Tableau Orange at our corporate Christmas tournament that we hold annually. Now, although I play pretty often, the tragedy of my life, unfortunately, is that I'm not very good. Sadly, I probably reached my peak at school when I was playing in the same team as someone called Max Emer, who I learned recently actually captains Gillingham these days. So a slightly different career trajectory there. But how does a footballing novice like me predict the next big thing in player recruitment? So it's the same answer I would give to explain any relatively significant finding or insight within a business, and that's to combine data with the expertise and curiosity of people using the right tool for the job. So in my case, within this particular story, I came into the possession of a very rich data set of player stats, and with some decent visual analytics software, I was able to follow a natural flow of questions that led me to a pretty interesting insight. Okay, so let me kick off my story by setting the scene. And by the way, this is a genuinely true story based on events that really happened. So let me just take you back to the Premier League season of 2016-2017, about February time. And if you can't quite place where football was at that point, it was around the point that Pep Guardiola just signed for Man City. Portugal just won the Euros. Allardyce managed the game for England. And Alexis Sanchez was actually one of the better players in the Premier League. I guess it's also worth acknowledging the winners of that season, which was Chelsea in almost every category there, except for top scorer. But my story is centered around the team I follow, Liverpool. Back when Jurgen Klopp was embarking on his first full season, Sadio Mane had just signed, and out went the likes of Benteke, Martin Skrtel, and Mario Balotelli. So as I mentioned, I came into the possession of a fairly rich data set of player statistics for the season in progress. So I did what I always do when I get a fairly interesting data set, which is connect it to Tableau. So let's transition to that. James, let me know if you can't see Tableau, but hopefully this is up on the screen at this point.
It certainly is, yes.
Great. So it was, like I say, February 2017, and I'm a relatively frustrated Liverpool supporter at this point. Let's take a look at some of the basics here. So this data set holds things like goals, some of the things you would expect, points per result, but also fairly specific things like aerial duels, 1 per player within each game, or big chances created, big chances blocked. So quite rich. But of course, my own interests sort of took hold, and I was driving based on those. So I took a look at the teams and how many goals each of them had scored. And Liverpool were sort of blowing teams away at this point in the season. That said, by looking at the number of points, I'm quickly reminded that actually they were languishing relatively down in 4th place, which wasn't really where we wanted to be, considering there were aspirations to win the league that year, as per every year. So if you're scoring a lot of goals, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that if you're not top of the points table, you're probably conceding a significant number of goals. So just putting that up on there. And for those that might be seeing Tableau for the first time, it really is that easy in terms of dragging and dropping. So we can see initially that around Liverpool's closest Premier League counterparts, they were indeed conceding quite a few more goals than the others. In fact, if we just focus in on the top 6 teams in the league, so what I'll do is just create a set. And if we focus in on that set of teams by putting the set onto filter, we can see that it really is quite a few more goals than you would want for a title challenger. So by putting an average lineup on there and maybe showing some of the numbers, 34 goals compared to the average of 26 goals conceded at this point in the season for a top 6 side isn't great viewing. Perhaps more useful though is sort of the ratio of goals that Liverpool were conceding per game. So just a quick little calculation of the count of matches played at that point. And we can see that, so Liverpool were conceding about a goal and a quarter a game. So over a goal a game, not particularly good for, like I say, a team of championship aspirations. So my next natural question on from this was there sort of an influx of goals conceded, or has this been a consistent issue that Liverpool's been experiencing? And so just to delve into the data a little further, I took a look at the number of goals conceded per team over the course of the match days that had occurred so far. And I took a cumulative view. So one of the quite neat things about Tableau is you can perform some quick calculations with a few clicks. So that's the cumulative view across all teams, but breaking that down by team, and then again focusing on the top 6. And then just highlighting Liverpool here, you can sort of gauge that the rate in which they were shipping goals was fairly consistent. Certainly were the top 1 or 2 in terms of goals conceded within the top 6 throughout this period, which again isn't great. And yet they were scoring a lot of goals and having a fairly decent number of points. So I was then curious about whether there was a certain point in which they could no longer really keep up the strategy of just outscoring the other team. So again, if we look at the running total of points and compare those points across the same period of time, we can see that actually they were able to pull off some results by just scoring more, but that strategy seemed to catch up with them. So certainly around December time, there was a bit of a blip, and by January time, the number of points and results had plateaued, which is sort of in line with how I was feeling emotionally as a fan. So I was thinking about why this has, and this often happens when analyzing data. So you find something interesting somewhat, and you sort of question why that might be the case. So I wanted to break down the types of goals that Liverpool were conceding. So just taking a look at some of the other types of data points in this data set. So things like the count of goals from corners, from direct free kicks, open play, all things I wanted to get a better picture over and a profile of how the teams in the top 6 concede goals typically. So if I build this out, let's take a look at all of these specific measures, put that on color, just have a more visual view, and let each measure have their own color scale. To be honest, the first thing that stood out to me was the number of penalties that Arsenal conceded at that point in the season. So 7 compared to the nearest rival 4, but most teams not many more. So either Arsenal at that point were just not very elegant in their defense in the box, or the referees really were out to get them. But anyway, going back to my main focus of the analysis, which was Liverpool, the thing that really stood out for me was goals conceded from corners. So you can see here that although the absolute values are not too dissimilar, so there's only 3 goals in it between the number of goals from corners that Tottenham have conceded versus Liverpool, but certainly significantly more than Chelsea or City had, for example, who are other teams looking to win the league that year. So that was certainly a problem area, which I noticed through that quick piece of investigation. And I think what you can gauge from that is is there's not a particular sense of dominance when it comes to aerial duels. And actually, to be completely honest, this wasn't something that I had necessarily learned for the first time in this piece of analysis. I mean, it was quite well documented that Liverpool would concede goals like this. And apologies for the video quality, but even if it was enhanced, it doesn't make for pretty viewing, let's be honest. So what would tend to happen was a lost aerial duel and then a silly goal to concede. That was against Swansea. A similar thing happening against Hull within that period of the season. And so quite a frustrating time for fans. So really the problem area was clear. Goals conceded from corners. So I wanted to delve deeper into how dominant Liverpool were in the air in defensive scenarios. And it was quite serendipitous that there's sort of the ideal set of metrics to gauge that. So defensive aerial duels won percentage. I sort of went through a few of these measures to see whether there are any sort of strong correlations between goals conceded and things like ground duels won or forward pass success rate. But I think common sense told me that defensive aerial duels was certainly significant. So taking a look at that and breaking it down by, again, team, and just going to swap the axes. No, that's fine. And focusing again on the top 6. Okay, so we knew before, I'll just change the mark type. We knew before that Liverpool had conceded the most number of goals. So along the x-axis, they're further to the right. But what was new, but perhaps a bit predictable, Liverpool's defense aerial duels won percentage was the lowest out of the top 6. But whether or not this is significant, whether they're a true outlier, I wanted to sense check. So I just threw on a quick distribution band just to gauge the deviation from the mean, and did that for both goals conceded and defensive aerial duel won percentage. And from that, the fact that they sit outside of the shaded area sort of told me that they are exceptionally poor in the air. And that's at least one contributing factor to conceding quite a lot of goals compared to the other top 6 teams. So the next step was, okay, what can be done about this so that I can have a slightly more pleasurable season as a fan? And like any fan would, I sort of ignored the possibility of potentially waiting for coaching staff to improve the set of players. Immediately jumped to the need that Liverpool needed to buy a new defender, which is of course a lot more exciting from where I sit. Now, admittedly, I jumped to this conclusion quite consistently throughout my time supporting the Reds. This time it was slightly different, just because of the analysis I had been through. So rather than a specific individual or a favorite player with a certain style of play, I was more thinking about how Liverpool could buy wins, how they could buy more points in order to move them up the table. And so just reversing the analysis that I had just done, they can buy more points by buying the ability to concede fewer goals, specifically from corners. And in order to do that, buy a higher success rate in terms of defensive aerial duels won. So because it's sort of boiled down to that stat, or I wouldn't say boiled down, but that specific stat became quite prominent, I wanted to rank the potential transfer targets by that specific measure. So putting defensive aerial percentage 1 in the view alongside the specific players within the Premier League. This is, of course, just the set of Premier League players at the time. And actually what I wanted to do was focus on just defenders at this point in time. And as well, making an assumption that it would potentially be harder to recruit a player from a fellow top 6 team. So I just, again, used the set, but this time to only focus on the teams outside of the top 6. And was there? Oh, yes. So there was a further consideration, which was that some of these players only played 1 or 2 games, and so their ratio was quite high. So in order to get a sort of a true view of how successful someone is in the air, typically had a minimum of 10 games to play before considering them. And so with a quick sort, I was able to uncover 2 standout performers in this area. So Harry Maguire and Virgil van Dijk, quite prominent names in today's world. But in 2016, 2017, they were still on the rise and not yet household names. So if we put their team in the view at this time, Harry Maguire was playing his football at Hull City, Van Dijk at Southampton. And it's quite clear that they were operating on another level compared to the rest of the pack when it comes to aerial duels won in defensive situations. And actually, I went ahead and took off the top 6 filter here just to take into account all defenders across the Premier League. And interestingly, if you just ignore, no, I'll just take that out. Harry Maguire and Virgil van Dijk still came out on top. So certainly from a data perspective, really influential defenders in the making. So I'll just take back a couple steps. Now, just building on my assumption of what's fairly realistic when it comes to player recruitment, obviously you probably wouldn't invest the kind of money Liverpool would invest in a player just based on one stat. So it's sort of building up a profile, potentially a similar profile to what Tom alluded to that's used at Swansea, but in this case, a recruitment scenario. So I thought defensive duels won along the ground would be an interesting stat to look at just to differentiate which one is the better candidate, Harry Maguire or Virgil van Dijk. And actually they were fairly even as far as defensive ground duels won. Quite high performers across the cohort of defenders in the league still, but quite even between those 2. So the next thing I started to consider was, okay, like every team, Liverpool liked to play out from the back, or tried to play out from the back. So something like passing accuracy seems to be a relevant thing to consider as well. So putting that in the view, able to quickly gauge here now that Virgil van Dijk was performing quite a bit better than Harry Maguire in that season as far as completed passes were concerned. So this was certainly attractive to Liverpool in my imaginary scenario at the time. And sure enough, Liverpool had seen similar things, surely. And we all know the story, decided to invest quite a large sum of money in Virgil van Dijk, and the rest is history. Now, the other little tidbit I noticed here was that within these 3 metrics, which is quite narrow, admittedly, but within these 3 that make up allegedly a good defender when it comes to solving Liverpool's specific problem, was Nathan Ake. So as far as passing accuracy and defensive ground duels won percentage, he was top of the pile for both of those stats. So to me, it's somewhat surprising that he's not gained more interest from some of the top players in the league. although it may happen. So I'm putting the money down here that Nathan Ake is probably going to be one of the significant defenders in one of the major leagues at some point. But perhaps one of the things counting against him at this moment in time is the aerial duels won percentage. That's fairly mid-table there, but quite interesting things. So I guess just to conclude, Virgil van Dijk and Harry Maguire were sort of the top two players that a novice footballing fan was able to identify quite quickly within the space of about 15 minutes. And we all know the success that these two players have achieved in the 3 years since I performed this piece of analysis. I mean, Van Dijk went from playing at Southampton, who were mid-table at the time, I believe, to becoming one of the best centre backs in the world, and Maguire's done all right also. Now, I doubt very much that I was the first to notice their ascent, or even the first to. I certainly wasn't the first to predict their success, but I'm fairly certain those that were, and those that noticed that they would be top of the pile as far as central defenders would go, did so because they had those three elements that I spoke about before. So they had the data, they had the right people in the right places analyzing that data, and were using the right tools to understand that data as well. So that's how people like me, even though we're sort of outside of the circle of the industry, can still pick out really interesting pieces of insight. So perhaps what's even more exciting is what these three elements, when brought together, could mean to you and your respective organizations. So which players would earn your clubs more points, or more expected goals, or whatever the specific target area needs to be. Which youth players would yield a more prosperous future for your club. Who will be the next big thing? So that's quite exciting. And so if you were to look at the same data set, but for today's year, who would you uncover? And really with these three elements, there's not a lot stopping you from answering those questions today. So thanks for listening to my story. That's it from me. Happy to answer any questions about this story or Tableau generally. But back to James.
Thanks very much, Adam. We do indeed have a question. This one from Anonymous. Thinking about how would you take team styles into account? So thinking about perhaps Southampton and Hull City at the time, playing maybe in different style of football to Liverpool and Manchester United. So have you got any ideas for taking into account the team style of play when using this kind of analysis and working with the data from a scouting perspective?
Yeah, so like I say, I'm a little bit outside of the circle of football, so I'm sure these ideas already exist, and this is the perfect forum for those ideas to come out. And I'm sure Tom has some insight into this as well, but I think the assumption I would make is more data to supplement the current data set. And something that Tableau specifically is very good at is just integrating data from different places. So I think if you were to integrate a data set like this with some broad data sets that summarize the styles of play, then those can be factors for you to literally integrate into the analysis that you do.
Sounds good. And another question here, as a reflection I had when you were talking through it as well. I noticed how clean and tidy your folder system was, and also the names of your measures and dimensions. So sometimes when we're bringing in Optadata, StatsBomb data, they aren't always named in a particularly friendly manner for actually analyzing them in Tableau. So is that something that you did at the time in Tableau Desktop? And I guess now that is something that maybe you can do in Tableau Prep instead?
Yeah, so at the time, it wasn't something that I could do, and I didn't have Tableau Prep available to me. So I did do it in Tableau Desktop. It wasn't all too painful, to be honest. It was just a case of patiently understanding a specific measure and renaming it if it needed to be. I was lucky that this specific data set was relatively clean when I got it as well. But it certainly sounds like Tableau Prep would be beneficial in today's world. If I were to receive a fairly dirty data set from Opta, for example, I would certainly put that through something like Tableau Prep. You can do clever things like use data profiles so that it can expect a certain type of field to be converted into something that falls within your internal standard for naming convention. So if I was doing this today, I would certainly use Tableau Prep.
Sounds good. And I think having heard a couple of talks now, we've had one from Tom where we're looking at lots of different use cases, how it works from inside an organization, but the what I sometimes refer to as the flow when you've got a data set and you start exploring it, and Tableau makes that really easy when you've got a new data set that you're trying to explore, and as you've seen there, you just click on new sheets. You're kind of starting with a question in mind. It leads to another question. I think a general reflection for people that have been watching this and are just getting started with Tableau. So we've got another question around being an experienced user of Tableau. How do you recommend learning how to use it from a completely new standpoint? Do you want to take a shot at that? And
Sure. I mean, I can speak to my own experience. What I did was play with Tableau. So I connected Tableau to a data set that interested me on a personal level, and that just drives natural curiosity. And when you're curious, you try to achieve specific things in Tableau that you don't know how to do, but you're compelled to because it's inherently interesting to you. So that's what drives the behavior to Google how to do a certain thing. It drives you to sign up to a certain live training, or to email your account manager to ask how that specific thing can be achieved. So my advice I give to everybody is to connect to something that's interesting to them, whether it's work related or not, and that's a really great way to get started.
Super. And I think given the nature of the industry that we're talking about here, the data is inherently really interesting. I think a lot of the time you'll start off using Tableau. You'll have the Superstore sales data set, which is great. But here we've got something that's real life, something that you can quickly start to create the charts that you were creating. There wasn't any huge magic. It was just the questioning and the process that you went through that made that a really useful presentation and something that was engaging and answered the questions that you set out with. I guess from my perspective, another quick tip for those getting started. I'll let Eva do her pitch on Makeover Monday, but there's some really great community initiatives out there. Not just working with the data that you've got every day. If you want to explore information and data from other contexts, so outside of sport, or you've been within sport, we've probably got an initiative per day of the week that is releasing some kind of data, some kind of challenge that you can engage with. So all of that will be on the Tableau community page, and I'm sure we can send out a link to that at the end of the webinar. But again, a really interesting way to start to engage with data either inside of football or outside of football. Eva, do you want to give give Makeover Monday a quick summary or overview?
I do. Thank you. So yeah, for those who have not come across Makeover Monday yet, it's a social data project where every Sunday we publish a data set about any topic really, and we ask people to create a better visualization than the one that we put out there. So we get data from news websites, etc., and it's all public data. So you can publish your stuff, you can talk about it publicly. It all runs on Twitter with the hashtag Makeover Monday. And what I've noticed, I've run this now for 3 years, co-hosted it, and people who participate consistently, we really see their skills grow and improve. And we have a feedback webinar every week as well, where we give people feedback on their visualizations. And it's been really good to see what comes out of it in terms of people's skills, what they make of it, finding new jobs, not suggesting anyone should leave their job, but that for some people was an important step to get to do more with data, and just having an opportunity to practice something consistently where there's nothing writing on it. There's no prizes. There is no, it's not a race or competition in any way. It's literally just take a data set. We prepare all the data for you. It's typically quite simple data, and then just work with it just to build your skills. So there's my little pitch. And the website is makeamonday.co.uk.
Super. Yeah, I can attest to that. It's brilliant for both your own personal development, personal learning, and the way that Eva, Andy as well used to run it. The way that they foster that sense of community, and also providing feedback on their weekly webinars is really useful to kind of get the opinion of someone else to look over your work, give you some constructive suggestions, and then for you to be able to go back and add to that by taking on board those suggestions. That general progression over weeks and weeks of working gets you to both proficiency with the tool and proficiency with designing for best practice. So understanding what a good visualization looks like, the aspects and the parts of visualization that you need to think about to make it a clear and understandable visualization that actually gives some kind of insight to the person that you're delivering it to. And I might as well give a quick plug to the community that I co-run with a couple of other people, which is sports-based. So we've got one called Sports Viz Sunday, and currently the monthly data is on Formula One, given the start of the new Formula One season this month. So every month we'll release a topical data set that has got something to do with a sporting occasion during the month. And so this month's Formula One, we've got race data since 1950, since the start of Formula One. We've got the practice data from the last couple of weeks testing in Barcelona, and we've also got the last 25 years of lap data from the Australian Grand Prix. So there's loads of stuff in there, and often when people are getting started, finding interesting data can be a bit of a challenge. So these are the communities that kind of make this a bit easier and make it more accessible for people that are starting out with the tool to start to play around and start to find those stories. So I think with that, thank you very much, Adam. Another really interesting presentation from a different angle, looking more at visual analytics and tracing that story. And